other ways of getting into the workforce. So I am very focused on a supportive housing program and more money for our homeless youth as well as our homeless adults.
Thank you. Carrie?
So Daniel, it's tragic that such a high percentage of our homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. That is just clear evidence that our kids are not safe at home. They're not safe at school. They are leaving in order to find opportunities that their communities aren't providing for them. And so the first thing we have to do is make sure that there's housing available that these youth can have access to. A lot of these kids aren't going to be able to earn enough money at that age to pay for their housing. So we need a social safety net that provides housing for homeless youth that have run away, particularly kids that are vulnerable because of their identity. And for too long in Colorado, we have cut back on our investment in social services and safety net services because the Tabor Amendment has denied our state the ability to make those investments in our communities. You will see me as governor of this state, as I have in the past, taking on Tabor twice at the statewide ballot and winning. I will lead the bipartisan coalition here in Colorado to pass permanent Tabor reform so that we can make investments in our communities that support community mental health, social safety net services, and housing so that our vulnerable kids can get the care that they need.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Bobby Kennedy said if you want to look at a measure of how a country is doing, look at the health of their children. I think the flip side of that is if you want to see a measure of where the country is failing, look at those communities who are overrepresented in homelessness. If you look at, for instance, our veterans in this country who are also overrepresented in our homeless community. Those are people who've gone through incredible trauma and then not been provided the supports they need to be successful. And so why are we surprised that they end up in those situations? The fact that our young people who are LGBT are in that same context tells us both they are still going through incredible trauma and whatever the homes are that they're living in or the situations are they're living, and we are failing to support them through that trauma to make sure they have a place to land. So I think that has two major implications for us. One is, how do we do a much better job of supporting young people in schools with the kind of counseling and support they need when they're facing those hard decisions and they might be on the brink of getting kicked out of their home. One of the most powerful things I've learned in the last 6 months is I was out in Grand Junction talking to some high school students there who were telling me, they still call me Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston, you know, we lost not just one student to suicide at Grand Junction High School last year. We lost 4 kids in 1 year in one high school. And often that is because there's only one counselor left for every 500 kids. And that counselor's got to both provide you class credits, got to help you apply to college, and maybe if there's time, 3 weeks out, get an appointment to talk through a major life crisis you're trying to work your way through. When people ask, what is it going to cost to fund education appropriately, I would say the deeper question is, what is it going to cost us if we don't?
Okay, thank you.
You know, judge us both by what we have done and what we will do. I started a school for homeless youth about 14 years ago, the Academy of Urban Learning, in partnership with Urban Peak. When we started, it was on Santa Fe. Now it is across from North High School. Most years, about a third to half the students identify as members of the LGBTQ community. And very often, the experience of being an LGBTQ community member is directly related to their predicament with regard to housing. We need to make sure that we have a foster care system that meets the needs of LGBTQ youth. We need to make sure we have wraparound educational services. Mike mentions counseling. One of the things that the Academy of Urban Learning does is it builds in the full suite of services, including mental health, counseling, social workers, in the school environment, so it can really help meet the learning needs of the kids and help them achieve their college degree. I'm also proud to say the Academy of Urban Learning actually requires that students apply to and get into at least 2 community colleges or colleges as a condition of graduation to show them that they can achieve at a higher level if they choose to take it there. I think the next governor really needs to set an inclusive tone. We need to make sure that parents aren't able to engage in legal child abuse by sending their kids off to conversion therapy and torture. And we need to make sure that we address the needs through the foster care system of all youth without a home, including LGBTQ youth.
Great, thank you. So we've been talking a lot more about youth, so let's keep on that and talk a little bit more about schools. So we'll start with you, Carrie. In 2011, Colorado passed a bill to address the problem of anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment in our schools. Yet 7 out of 10 Colorado students report being harassed based on their sexual orientation, and nearly 3 out of 4 transgender students were prevented from using their preferred name or their pronouns in their schools. How can we make schools more welcoming and inclusive for all students, including LGBTQ students?
We need professional support within the schools, and right now, because of decades of underinvestment, almost 30 years of budget cuts in K-12 education, the professional support that people who can identify and have the expertise to be able to help students who are struggling with these issues, who are being bullied, who are the targets of harassment, who aren't able to find a safe place at school. Those professionals aren't there anymore. I hear too often of one counselor working in 3 or 4 different schools with a couple hundred kids at each school. They can't possibly know or understand or be able to address the needs of kids at each of those schools. So our kids are being left isolated, they're being left without the support that they need. And teachers often identify a student who's struggling. They know when they have a child that might need some additional help. They're not able to go get the professional support that can really identify those issues and help address them within the school, whether it's restorative justice issues, it's additional training programs, it's bringing in professional expertise. And I want to recognize One Colorado and Daniel, the work that you all have been doing in providing the professional guidance. I think 80% of districts now have, in our state, have anti-bullying policies, anti-discrimination policies for LGBTQ students. Congratulations on that. But we need to make sure we have the professional staff within these schools to support our students.
Mike?
Thank you. I was a proud supporter of this legislation when it passed, but more importantly, I spent almost a decade of my life as a school principal. And we had 2 very clear rules in my school, which is, one is everybody gets a second chance. But the second is, and even more important, nobody ever gets to make someone else feel small in their own home. Which means no one ever gets to make you feel lesser or makes you feel left behind or make you feel like you're not a part of this community. That is the one unforgivable thing. And I think for a long time as a public school teacher, public school principal, we got afraid of having values. We got afraid of the notion, oh, as a public school, we couldn't say we were for this, or we couldn't say we were against this. I actually think as a teacher and as a leader, it is your job to say, no, I'm entirely clear about the fact that I am for the fact that everyone belongs in this room. And no one can be treated differently for whatever they walk in the door with. And I think that kind of leadership has to come from principals, has to come from the governor, has to come from superintendents who say, I understand. I have parents who are upset because they don't believe in one of my transgender students' right to choose their own pronouns. But that is not my choice, and this is my school. And in my school, we're going to hold these values, and if you disagree with it, don't yell at the kid, come talk to me. I think that is what we're going to need now, is because we wouldn't now say it's your choice if you think that a black student in your class doesn't have the same qualifications as you do. We wouldn't say it's your choice to say that we don't think the girls in the class should be as good at science anymore. But there are too many places where we're stepping back and saying, this is not an area we want to wade into. This is an area we have to wade into as educators and as leaders because it's our job.
Great, thank you. Jared?
You know, when I was in high school, when my partner Marlon was at Boulder High, there weren't gay-straight alliances or GSAs. Neither of us were out in high school. Most kids weren't. There was that gay kid, but it was not a thing. There was not a safe place. There was not a place to be. We've come a long way in many schools with GSAs, with the toolkits that One Colorado has provided to school districts to support them. But we also need stronger legal protections for transgender and for gay and bisexual students. That's why I introduced the Student Non-Discrimination Act nationally, to provide a legal backstop to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity nationally. And yes, we need stronger laws here in Colorado, so there's a direct cause of action for students and families if they face a situation where the teachers or administration are complicit in the discrimination that their children face. With this Washington going the wrong way, and with Secretary DeVos removing the guidance with regard to transgender students, and I had the opportunity to grill her on it 2 weeks ago, states need to lead the way on an inclusive environment that serves all students and a safe and civil learning environment where no student should ever have to fear going to school.
Thank you. Donna?
Thank you. Well, leadership starts at the top, and unfortunately we have a problem in Washington where we have a person who feels it's okay to discriminate against all kinds of people. And so, given that, and quite frankly, I mostly ignore it because there's nothing I can do about it, but I know I can do something as the leader of the state of Colorado, and that is to set a good example, and to set an example around inclusiveness that starts with who I appoint to work for me in my administration. So that's number one. Number two, unfortunately, the governor doesn't have a whole lot of control over the school system. I've done a lot of work to try to make sure that there is a much more collaborative relationship with the school system, but you've got to have in every leadership role, whether it's the head of the State Board of Education, it's district superintendents, it's teachers, that inclusiveness is always emphasized. I would encourage and support more laws and rules that would encourage that kind of inclusiveness. I have 3 children, they're biracial. When they were growing up and we could finally afford a house, 4 blocks away was a completely non-integrated school. My kids could have walked to school. I put them on a bus. They went 2.5 miles away into a community that was full of housing projects with a lot of diversity because I knew that was the world they were going to have to grow up in, and I wanted them to understand that in spite of the fact they weren't so happy that mom was putting them on a bus.
Great, thanks. So we're going to sort of mix things up a little bit here. So we've got a fun round, so you'll notice that each of you all have a whiteboard in front of you. And another piece that we also want to have a little bit of fun with Twitter. We know that all of you are very, very active on Twitter. You all are tweeting and things are being tweeted at you or about you. And so one of the things that we asked all the candidates to do was to prepare some, like, a bizarre, a funny, just a random tweet that may have caught their attention or two. So we've asked them to bring their tweets with them. And so we'll start with, maybe something that was bizarre, something that stood out to you and that's been tweeted at you or tweeted about you. So let's start with you, Mike. Tell us, yes, tell us and then we'll do the whiteboards after.
I got trolled by a number of people on Twitter who wanted me to ban lettuce. Which I was not aware was a thing, but apparently there is a strong and growing movement to ban lettuce.
Jared?
I'll go because he's looking for something. So I got tweeted that I couldn't be the governor because I don't have gubernatorial hair. It's true, you can find it, but I did want to respond. Neither does Congressman Polis.
You get an extra 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I've actually said this to my staff. I said Mike and Carrie have the best hair of all 4 of us by far. I say Mike's first, Carrie's a close second. Don and I are distant third and fourth.
Great. Carrie?
All right, for those of you who've seen my commercial, this is my favorite tweet. It's from @Polinsky. I always feel like Kerry Kennedy's commercials are trying to sell me a Subaru. Hashtag.
Thank you. And then, so everyone has one more.
I was going to do it. I'm looking up the exact one. I can't find it. But it's basically a tweet, something along the lines of, why don't you tell people you're gay?
I don't either. All right, so let's move on to the whiteboards now. And we've got a couple of questions for you. So the first one is, do you support banning the harmful practice of conversion therapy? Banning. All right, we've all got strong yeses. Excellent. So the next question If you found yourself in the bottom 2 on RuPaul's Drag Race, which thank you all for being here tonight, I know RuPaul is on right now, but which song would you choose to lip sync for your life? Which song would you choose to lip sync for your life? We got Donna with It's Raining Men.
That's a good one.
The Gambler from Mike. Raining Men from Jared as well. And from Carrie is Imagine. Yeah. All right, so we've got a couple more questions on the speed round. So, where is your favorite place in Colorado to visit? Your favorite place in Colorado? Tracks. Creed, Colorado. We've got Salida over here. And Carrie, we've got Winter Park. All right, and then the next question, again, do you support making it less burdensome for transgender Coloradans to update their birth certificates? Less burdensome. We've got strong yeses on our end. All right, and the last question is name an LGBTQ icon that you admire.
Those are good questions. I go to a lot of these, and this is probably the best one so far. The most entertaining, which says a lot about work.
Milk. Harvey Milk.
Yeah, that's a good one.
My friend H from Donna. And we've got Martina Navratilova over here. All right, so that is enough with our whiteboards, and we're gonna move back on to some questions. So we are starting with Mike here. So the next question is that studies have consistently shown that there are pay gaps between LGBTQ people and their non-LGBTQ counterparts. These gaps are even greater for LGBTQ women, people of color, and transgender people. What would you do to close these pay gaps and ensure equal economic opportunity for all LGBTQ Coloradans and their families?
Thank you, great question. That was a fun round, by the way. We should come back to that again.
Yeah.
So I think two major things that matter. One is obviously we have to make sure that we have and keep on the books anti-discrimination policies and that we enforce them. A lot of times you'll find practices that are not, or laws that are not enforced, which is why you're allowed to see these kind of gaps in the system. But the second is what we know is that the discriminatory practice of one boss gets compounded over and over and over by future bosses by the simple practice of saying, when you go to hire someone, what did you get paid at your last job? This is also the most discriminatory impact on women in the workforce, because when you get a discriminatory position, then that gap compounds itself over and over and over again. And so one of the things I will do as governor is to stop that practice entirely from any public hiring interviewing, to say you cannot ask someone what their last salary was. You just have to look at what their actual skills are and what their qualifications are. And they should be paid based on those qualifications, not based on what the opinion might have been of their last boss.
Okay, thank you. Jared?
So, across the country, women still earn less than 78 cents on the dollar for a man. That's why I strongly support nationally equal pay for equal work laws. And you know what? It's about gender, it's about race, but it's also about sexual orientation and gender identity. And I think it's important to build coalitions. We have to look at this in a truly intersectional way to say that everybody should be rewarded based on their quality of their work. Whether you're black, whether you're brown, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're gender nonconforming, whether you're transgender, whether you're gay, whether you're bisexual, whether you're straight. We should not tolerate pay differences in the workplace that also promote overall economic inefficiency. We also need to make sure that our economy works for everyone. And part of the frustration I think a lot of Coloradans have is, though we've had good economic growth and unemployment is low, many Coloradans are falling behind. Might have gotten a 2 or 3% raise at work, but costs have gone up 10 or 15%. I support the organized labor movement so workers have a seat at the table. I support allowing communities to raise the minimum wage to reflect local market conditions. And we also have a plan to increase employee ownership and participation in profits. In the companies I started, every employee got stock options. There's ESOPs like New Belgium Brewery that are employee owned. I launched my campaign in Colorado Springs at an employee owned grocery store that's owned by the cashier and the bagger and the butcher. So I want our state to be the leader in employee ownership and profit participation, and we have our full plan to do that at polisforcolorado.com.
Great, thank you. Donna?
Well, first, I think we have to talk about the fact that you need courage. Women, and I've been in this place, or LGBTQ, or people of color, need to have the courage, and I want to encourage them as governor, because I'll set a standard that you should be able to go into your employer. I found out that I was getting paid less than my male counterparts, and I confronted one of my employers, not the governor, don't worry. We get paid really less than pretty much everybody in the government. And so you've got to be able to have that courage and feel like somebody's going to be there for you. So good, strong human resources policies are really important. I think that we all know, whether the wage gap nationally is actually at 78 cents, as Congressman Polis said. Here in Colorado, it's a little better. It's 84 cents, but it still exists. And we've got to tackle the reasons why that exists. I'm really proud, and thank goodness we got our Office of Civil Rights continued in this legislative session, but we shouldn't wait. We shouldn't wait for something to get there. We have to be proactive. And we know, even in state government, there are wage disparities. As your next governor, I will take that on. I don't need to study it anymore. We're going to take it on in terms of promotion policies. One great thing we did in my former organization was you had to interview different people when you got to top executive jobs. They couldn't all look alike, and that ensures promotional opportunities as well as equal wages.
Thank you. Carrie?
We need to guarantee equal pay for equal work. I can't believe it's 2018 and we are still having to make this argument on behalf of women and women of color and LGBTQ individuals who right now are doing the same job and getting paid less. When I was the CFO at the city of Denver, I took a look at how the folks who reported to me were getting paid, and sure enough, right in front of me in my own office was the pay gap. And I made an immediate correction and equalized the pay of the folks who were reporting to me. Our anti-discrimination laws in this state protect people based on their sexual orientation. We have to make sure that those laws are being enforced, and we definitely need to do more to ensure that everyone has opportunities to further their education, to further their adult education, to train up so that as they want to move up the professional ladder, that they have opportunities for education that doesn't sink them into permanent debt.
Great, thanks. And speaking of civil rights and anti-discrimination protections, we'll start with you, Jared, for this question. In a post-masterpiece world, opponents of equality are going to work harder than ever to undermine Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act in our state legislature, on the federal level, and in the courts. As governor, what will you do to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, I think we know the true agenda of those on the other side. I've run against Kevin Lundberg. He was my opponent for Congress one year. I'm happy to say I beat him, just like I'm going to win in November against Walker Stapleton. But I think that there will be, the other side will try to use this case as an opening to re-examine the role and the legitimacy of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. It's important to note in reading the decision, in no way did it erode our civil rights protections in our state. We need to make sure that the Civil Rights Commission does their job in a thorough and professional way. And we need to show, and I say this as a person of faith, that there is nothing inconsistent with religious freedom and preventing discrimination. Religious freedom should never be a shield that somehow excuses or legitimizes not serving people based on who they are or who they love. That should be a political precedent, that should be a legal precedent, and that should be a value of those whom the governor appoints to the Civil Rights Commission to adjudicate cases in a thoughtful way to fully implement Colorado's fully inclusive non-discrimination laws.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, imagine if on religious grounds you could deny somebody access to any good or service. It doesn't make any sense to me. Our Office of Civil Rights is professional. We are working with some additional training for all of the boards and commissions, and as governor, you have the authority to appoint a substantial number of members to boards and commissions. They have to be highly qualified. You have to work with them on how they issue their decisions, and I'm proud of the work that they've done. Now, I think we are going to see some more attacks, but the key to the success of extending the commission was, in fact, bipartisanship. And we have some amazing Republican senators and representatives, it's a small number, but there's some of them, that stood up, partly because their own family members, they knew would be impacted if we didn't have an Office of Civil Rights. So I would work to continue to strengthen it, to fight back, to make sure that we have non-discrimination policies throughout our state, and that we work in some of those communities where we know they're not so predisposed to do that. And I think, again, a strong governor sets the leadership tone by being inclusive and continuing to fight that fight. And of course, last, we need an attorney general in our state who is a Democrat, although I will say the Republican attorney general stood up for us in Masterpiece, but we need to make sure that will happen on every civil matter that we deal with in the state of Colorado.
Great, thank you. Carrie?
If the Colorado General Assembly passes any legislation that weakens our civil rights protections here in Colorado, weakens our anti-discrimination laws here in Colorado, I will veto it. And if Washington takes any steps to weaken federal civil rights protections and anti-discrimination laws, I will sue them. We will raise those standards here. Whatever they weaken in Washington, we will put right back in place here, and I won't hesitate to sue the federal government to protect the civil rights of people here in Colorado, with or without a Democratic Attorney General. Yes, I would love for you to send a Democrat to the Attorney General's office so that we can partner together, but the governor has legal authority to act without the Attorney General, and you will see me step up to protect and defend the civil rights of people in this state. You know, people see Colorado as a leader, as a national model, as a state that the rest of the country can look to. That is the leadership that we will provide here in our state.
Thank you, Mike.
For many of us who grew up here, you remember the 20 years we went through the scourge of Amendment 2 and how it felt to be the state that people looked at as the hate state or the discrimination state. When we finally pulled ourselves out of that with civil unions and then marriage equality, I think a lot of us felt like we were never going to go back to that place again. People looked at Colorado as if we were the ones trying to keep people out. And so I think this is a moment where actually we don't wait for legislation. We say, if that's going to be what the Masterpiece decision is, how do we as an entire community step up and courageously say, here's what Colorado's values are? So I came out right after Masterpiece with a plan to start working together with people in the wedding industry all across the state to say, if you're going to leave open the possibility that someone on their best day, after they get engaged, goes to walk in and pick their cake together, or fit a dress together, or choose a photographer together, only to find out 20 minutes into the conversation they won't serve you, you've taken the most beautiful process and made it the most humiliating and the most embarrassing. So let's instead solve that problem by saying everyone has the right to know they are welcome when they walk in the door. So we started a small movement called #OpenCO, which is we've asked everyone who is a vendor in any part of the wedding industry in Colorado to simply signal on their website, on your brochures, in your place of business, that you are an organization that is open to serve everybody for all needs. And we encourage you, whether you're getting married or you're going to a wedding, whether you're straight or trans, or whether you are gay, to say, we only use vendors, we only attend weddings with vendors, we only support businesses that are open to everybody. I think Colorado should lead right now, all of us, and not wait for the legislature.
Thank you. Excellent, thank you all. So now let's start the next question with Donna. We're gonna change it up a little bit. So the rural-urban divide in Colorado has been widely reported on over the past few years. The gaps in opportunity and resources for LGBTQ Coloradans are even more pronounced for those living in rural Colorado. What's your plan to close the rural-urban divide, and how does this plan include LGBTQ Coloradans?
Well, thank you. I am really proud of two things that have happened in the last couple of months. First, Club 20, which as you know is the 20 Western counties, and fairly conservative, gave me an award. I don't think a lot of Democrats get awards from Club 20, and it's called the Bridge Builder. And it's based on the work that I've done over the last 2+ years in bringing issues like rural broadband, water, and transportation issues into the Capitol and building that into a lot of the platforms that the governor and I, along with the legislature have worked on. The second is the Durango Herald, pretty far away, representing a lot of rural Colorado, endorsed me this weekend because of the experience, because of the ability to build those bridges. I think, again, I know of one senator who represents a good swath of rural Colorado who is a strong proponent of LGBTQ rights. And he's the kind of person that we need in leadership, regardless of party. We've got to think about how we have those personal stories translate into policy and into practice. I mentioned before schools. We've got to make sure that those schools in rural Colorado, which tend to be a little more conservative, reflect our communities. And we can do that through leadership, we can do that through appointments, we can do that through funding, and we can do that through providing better mental health services in all of our schools. It's got to start there because that's where young people learn and where we have to set those models.
Thank you. Carrie?
So I hear too often on this campaign that there are two Colorados. There's the metro area and there's everywhere else. When I served as state treasurer, I traveled throughout rural Colorado and toured a lot of the schools across our state. You get out into those farming communities and kids are going to school in buildings that were built at the turn of the century and not this century. And those communities don't have the money to make any upgrades or improvements. So kids are sitting in classrooms with lead pipes and asbestos and mold. The buildings flood. I've toured schools where sewage backs up. As state treasurer, I worked with Republican and Democratic leadership to develop the largest rural infrastructure program in education. More than $1 billion has been invested that's rebuilt over 400 schools throughout the state, giving students in rural Colorado the opportunities to learn technical and professional skills and to have the same high quality education that kids get here on the Front Range. Far too many LGBTQ people living in rural communities don't have access to the support or the services that they need. It starts in the school, but it's also health care, access to health care, access to mental health care, and support and resources within those communities that the state has to do a better job supporting those communities and providing because they can't do it alone.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. I grew up on the Western Slope. How many folks here grew up in a small town? Okay, so you know the only thing tougher than feeling forgotten when you grow up in a small town is feeling different in a small town where your whole town feels forgotten, right? So when you look at the travails of many of the LGBT community across the state, the places where it's often the most difficult is when there's only 10 kids in your high school class. And so when we look at what we're seeing across the state, we are seeing communities that are struggling economically, and as those communities struggle more and more economically, they get to be tougher and tougher places, which make them tougher places for kids, tougher places for families, and you can feel that resentment growing. And so I think these two things are connected, actually. The more we do to grow those towns economically, the more I think we do to have people feel at home and feel seen and feel respected in those communities. So I was very proud. I launched an effort in the Senate called Jumpstart, which was a plan to try to grow economic development in rural parts of the state, where we knew we needed more incentives to attract businesses to move to rural parts of the state or to grow in rural parts of the state. We started in Grand Junction. Already has been incredibly successful there, 10 to 12 businesses that have started up, almost 200 jobs created. And there is a sense of revival now in Junction if you go there, where there is a technology community, there's a startup community, there's a sense of energy. I think we have a lot of small towns that want to see that come back. That means, yes, investment in Jumpstart. It means, yes, getting high quality broadband in all those communities so you can get a job that you work remotely but still stay in the small town that you love. And it means making sure everybody has access to the skills they need for the jobs that are coming, which is why I proposed the Colorado Promise, which allows up to 2 years of skills or job training debt-free in exchange for providing service to the state. So those are the things I would do.
All right, Jared?
We have a plan to bring universal broadband and high-speed internet connectivity to every community in Colorado. I was in Fort Morgan yesterday, and we talked about the importance of enabling telecommuting, of access to telemedicine. But frankly, high-speed internet connectivity also means something to the LGBTQ community. For those of you who are members of the LGBTQ community, how many of you for whom was the internet an important part of your coming out experience? It was for me. And for kids growing up in Julesburg or Craig, who might think they're the only one who's trapped in a body of the wrong gender, the only lesbian in the world, the only gay person in the world, it's an important lifeline. It can save lives, it can help people access services, whether it's watching coming out videos on YouTube or watching other people transition and find their true selves. Beyond the economic benefit for development of powering our rural communities in a 21st century economy, it's important that people of all ages have access to a world of information through the internet. We also talk a lot about how our renewable energy agenda will empower the economy of rural Colorado. In eastern Colorado, it's our renewable energy corridor. We'll cite solar and wind projects, more income for farmers, jobs for kids and grandkids, and construction and maintenance of solar and wind facilities. Too often, our economies in our rural areas revolve around commodities like oil and gas or agriculture. We need to better round out that economic development by investing in renewable energy technologies that'll lead to cleaner air, doing our part on climate, and creating good green jobs that can never be outsourced.
Thank you. All right, and we'll start with you, Carrie, for this next question. So LGBTQ Coloradans report facing a number of barriers that prevent them from accessing the healthcare they need. How will you ensure that LGBTQ Coloradans, especially transgender Coloradans, can access quality, affirming care no matter where they live?
Yeah, I read a staggering statistic that about 40% of LGBTQ individuals aren't even open with their providers. They're not sharing that information with their doctors. So access to health care and access to high quality and appropriate health care to meet individual needs is a challenge throughout our state, but I think it's a special challenge for transgender individuals. It's a particular challenge if people aren't feeling that they have a relationship with their physician, that they can have these conversations. I have called for the state of Colorado to offer a public health insurance option to everyone in our state. There are too many people who can't access the care that they need, and the only health insurance that's offered in their communities is just too expensive for them to afford. So I am proposing that we open up our state's Medicaid program and the 2 plans that we offer our state employees, and let anyone in Colorado purchase those plans as their health insurance. It will give more individuals across our state reduced cost on their premiums and greater access to the care that they need, including the LGBTQ community.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Thank you. A couple of things. As governor, I would ensure that healthcare decisions are decisions between a doctor and the patient, which means they ought to be protected, they ought to be supported, there ought not to be any intrusion from the government into those sort of decisions. We ought to make sure that we have plans that actually cover all types of care. Also, one of the things that I found really compelling from the One Colorado survey that you all shared was that more than 60% of people surveyed in the LGBT community said they thought there was a shortage of access to high-quality mental health services and of well-trained mental health professionals who could be supportive. And that shortage is even more pronounced in rural areas. We have dozens of counties across Colorado that now don't have any mental health providers in them, which means if you want mental health support, you were talking about traveling a long distance to even get access to that. So a couple things I will do as governor. One is I want to provide incentives to bring mental and behavioral health experts out to rural parts of the state so they exist in those areas. The other is to expand more telemedicine so you can get access even to a specialized treatment on the other side of the state, even if you don't live there. And then also decriminalizing mental health statewide, so folks that come into the criminal justice system with mental health needs actually get treatment, don't just get thrown in prison. I do want to close with one other topic, which is we disagree occasionally on items on this stage, but I don't know that I've taken the full measure to thank you, Jarrett, for the glass ceiling that you're breaking in this race, which is I went to law school with a bunch of friends of mine who were gay, and wanted to run for office, but they said, I could probably never be the candidate because I'm gay, so I'll be the person behind the scenes. And I think about all the 20, 25, 30-year-olds who want to start a life in politics, who are watching this race that you're in and saying, I can do that. I think that's a big change in this state. So I want to
Thank you. And Jared?
So, we have, there is a policy difference on healthcare between our candidates here. I'm the only candidate who supports Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare for every Coloradan. And to those who say we can't achieve that, that's a failure of the imagination. Every other country in the industrialized world has achieved universal healthcare. And we actually have a model right here in our country. Medicare, seniors have it today. We can do that for everybody. It's not going to happen at the national level. I've supported it for 10 years. I was proud to work with President Obama to pass the Affordable Care Act. I was proud to successfully against President Trump's effort to gut it. But I won't give up until every Coloradan has health insurance and we can use the leverage of a common payer to reduce rates. Because you know what? You all know this. You're getting ripped off today. Americans are paying 5 times as much, 8 times as much for the same prescription drug, made in the same factory, packaged in the same bottle as our Canadian and German friends. Americans should not have to pay more for less anymore. The states are where this innovation will occur. I'll look forward to building a common payer across several Western states, or if they're not ready, as a forward-looking, innovative state, I'm ready for Colorado to lead the way and be a pioneer to create a common payer to negotiate for better rates for all of us.
Thank you. Donna?
Thank you. I've almost spent 40 years of my career in healthcare, and I think it's important to be clear about what we're talking about. I support universal healthcare coverage for everybody in Colorado. That is what every country, industrialized country, has. They do not have single payer. And I think the voters spoke 2 years ago that they didn't want a single payer system. And perhaps one of the reasons was government being more involved in your healthcare was in fact threatening to a lot of people. So what I support is every person, whether what they look like, where they live, where they work, has healthcare coverage. That the state actually acts to facilitate that. But the truth is, whether we on this stage are talking about Medicare for all, Medicaid for all, single payer, any of those things, the reality is that's not going to solve our healthcare problems. There are too many profits in healthcare, and they're across the board. They're in doctors, they're in hospitals, they're in health insurance companies, and guess what? Sometimes we, patients, are the enemy. If you read recently, the American Society of Oncology said our doctors are prescribing the wrong treatments. Patients are getting too much care, which can also be harmful. I want to end, though, because the question was about the LGBT community, and the ACA has certainly benefited them. As I said, mental health is so important, but the relationship with doctors, and again, I'm so proud of the work that Kaiser has done to build those relationships with doctors, to collect that information, and to make it an open community.
Wonderful, thank you all. So we're gonna switch a little bit more, talking about some bipartisanship. So for the past 4 years, pro-LGBTQ legislation like the Birth Certificate Modernization Act and a ban on conversion therapy on minors has stalled thanks to our Republican-controlled state Senate. If elected governor, and the Senate is still controlled by Republicans, how would you work with Republican leadership to ensure these bills make it to your desk? We will start with Mike.
Amber Alert?
I think this is the most important
Amber
question
Alert.
to consider, because you don't just want to win an election for the sake of winning. You want to win an election for the purpose of governing, which is you want to be able to actually make changes and policies that are going to have impacts on people's lives. And that's the ultimate measure. And so I think on this, I mentioned before my rant, I spent 7 years in the Senate. When you talk to people, I think about some of the governors who've been most effective over the last 25 years. So you hear a lot of people say Roy Romer, or some say Bill Owens on the Republican side, because those were both governors who worked in the legislature and knew how to work the committees, how to work the leadership, how to build the coalitions you're going to need to actually get things done. So I'm very proud of the fact that some of the most controversial issues in the Capitol, whether it was immigration reform, whether it was renewable energy, whether it was the healthcare exchange, or whether it was expanding preschool investments, were all things I was able to pass with bipartisan support. Because you're going to have to do that if you want to make real progress on this, and that is about relationships, and that is about tenacity, and that is about being able to build bridges to places like Springfield and like La Junta and like Montrose that you don't often do normally as a Democrat. So I think that's what I've done my entire life, both in the legislature and as a school leader and a principal. And that's what I would do as governor, which is how do you take on the hardest problems and how do you actually find the way to bring people together to get them done. I've done that more than 100 times over the last 7 years, and I would do it 100 more as governor.
Thank you. Jared?
You know, I work closely in Congress with my Republican and Democratic friends, and I was determined to be the most effective member of the House delegation from Colorado. You know, we're all Americans, Republican, Independent, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, and everybody cares about our country in their own way. And where we disagree, we disagree. But trying to find common cause and basic humanity is an important role of both the governor and the legislature. Yes, I've built businesses in the private sector. Yes, I've started schools to serve homeless youth and new immigrants, and I chaired the State Board of Education, which was evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. But I've also shown through my decade in Congress that I've been able to build coalitions of Democrats and Republicans to get things done, including coalitions around equality-related issues. When we authored the Equality Act, we were proud to work with and be joined by my colleague Ileana Ross-Layton from Miami, a pro-equality Republican. We work with other pro-equality Republicans in our Student Non-Discrimination Act. And it's important that this cause of equality is bigger than just the Democratic Party. We need to celebrate support from across the ideological spectrum and work with people to show that we can build a sustainable majority for equality. Because Democratic and Republican majorities will come and go, we want to make sure that equality stays the law of the land.
Thank you. Donna?
You know, we've seen when the legislature has flipped one way, and maybe we've gone too far, and then it flips back, and then we're back in that situation. And I think an important part of being the governor is being able to work, no matter what the majority is, with the leadership. I've negotiated labor contracts for a lot of my life, negotiated contracts with hospitals, negotiated now in this role as the lieutenant governor, not just with the legislature, but quite frankly, you've got to negotiate with the people that you lead. You've got to be able to not only set a vision, you've got to be able to deliver results. And so I think as governor, one of the most important things is going to be able to work in whatever environment you're in. And you do that by bringing people together early. I will tell you, and Mike has been in the legislature, I'm sort of surprised that there is definitely two worlds. The executive branch acts in a certain way, the legislature acts in a different way. As governor, I would bring them together way sooner. It wouldn't be just a 4-month interaction that you have with the legislature, because you've got to build that relationship year-round. And I think it's one of our failures as a state. I don't think I want them in office in action more than 4 months, but there's a lot of work that we can do together if you have a collaborative governor.
Thank you. Carrie?
I think we're all amazed that sensible pieces of legislation like birth certificate modernization and ending conversion therapy, which, as Congressman Polis, I think, correctly pointed out, is just legalized child abuse. The fact that we haven't been able to build bipartisan support to pass those bills, I think, surprises all of us. But you don't have to look any farther than the success of the organization and organizations in this room to know exactly how we get there, how we get to the day when those laws are passed and they're signed. It's just persistence. It's staying at it year after year. It's continuing to raise the voices of the people who are impacted and affected and hurt by having bad public policy. It's continuing to elect leaders who will elevate these issues, who will talk about them across the state, who will negotiate in the Capitol and build the coalitions to get those laws passed. We have all been a part of efforts that have taken a lot longer than we thought they should, and we've kept at it. And that is exactly what we will continue to do to get these laws passed.
Thank you. All right, and now we're at our last question of the evening. It'll start with Jared. So many people in our state are non-binary and gender non-conforming, and more people are moving to Colorado from states that allow for gender designation on identity documents. But Colorado policies only allow for male or female gender designations. How will you make sure that Coloradans who identify as male or female have identity documents that match who they are?
You know what, people deserve the basic dignity of being able to identify as they choose. And that should be recognized. I remember when somebody was caucusing for me. That's something that Carrie and I went through. Mike did a little bit. Donna was probably smarter to avoid it. A transgender supporter of mine came up and said, my voter registration is as a man. My ID is as a man. I present as a woman. And it is traumatic for me to have to use my legal name because I have a new name and a new identity. No Coloradan should have, by the way, she didn't caucus, and that's why Carrie beat me at that level, by the way. So, you know, I mean, no Coloradan should have that basic dignity taken away from them. And we need to update, of course, all of our laws to reflect gender identity, whether conforming or non-conforming, to make sure that both people from other states who move here, as well as Coloradans that grow up, are able to have an official recognition of their own gender identity. That's a basic human right, and I know that we can achieve that here in Colorado.
Thank you, Donna.
Well, I'm a little busy these days because I have a full-time job. Not everybody does up here. And I have to tell you, my responsibilities span things like working with our prisons, worrying about water, working on healthcare issues. And as I prepared as a candidate to be here and to answer the questionnaire, I have to tell you I was appalled to find out some of the things the state's not doing. And you may know that the National Transgender Organization gave Colorado, I think, a B or a B minus. So I'm pretty competitive, so I went right away to the who got the A's because I want an A. I want an A as your governor, I want an A as your lieutenant governor. And so I had to ask the question to the task force, which Daniel mentioned, which was created in 2013. So my reaction was, why would it take from 2013 to 2018 to do something that seems common sense and we should be able to do right away? So my commitment to you is no matter what happens on June 26th, that task force is going to accelerate its work. And as your governor, I will not only make sure that we have that kind of three-level identification, whether it's on our birth certificates, on our driver's license, it's on other forms of identification, because 5 years is way too long to wait.
Great, thank you. Carrie?
So one of our family's closest friends has a binary gender identity. He's 20 years old, and it didn't occur to me until living through his eyes how often we're asked about our gender on his college applications, on all of his standardized exams, on everything we go through in our lives. We're always identified by our gender. And that is changing. And we need to make sure that our state and the legal documents that identify people as individuals recognize that this is a real issue and respect and value that not everyone is in a position where they're able to check one of those boxes. And so whether it is our birth certificate or our driver's license or marriage forms, we need to be respectful of individuals and who they are.
Thanks, Mike.
So to answer your question directly, yes, I support the idea of a non-binary identification that people could use for driver's licenses, for birth certificates. I think that is the core of your identity, is your ability to choose how you identify. And so I would support that. I think we can pass that. I've supported the birth certificates. I would do it as a driver's license as well for non-binary identifying. I'll add one example, but the frustration is, okay, we've tried this before, why is it not working? So I'll just give you one example of how I found solving hard problems like this in the legislature worked. I remember when we had the vote for civil unions, and it was the same day we were having the vote for the bill that brought me to the legislature, which was I had a number of students who were undocumented at the high school that I ran who could not go to college because they had to pay out-of-state tuition. And as we were having the final vote, we went into the civil unions vote, every one of the Republicans was opposed. And then 3 Republicans each came down to the well and one at a time said, I oppose this idea, but I couldn't possibly go back to my Thanksgiving dinner table and see my sister who is gay and say that I voted no. Or go call my college roommate who is gay and say that I voted no. So they voted yes. I thought what our failure was is to recognize that the answer to a lot of these problems is making people aware of the relationships that are right in front of them. So what I did is started traveling the state to identify a lot of the Republican leaders who had opposed this access for undocumented students to college, and found one state senator who had led the charge against it for a decade, until I helped him realize that on the Little League baseball team that he coached in Ray, Colorado, he had kids who were undocumented. And once he discovered that, he came in and became the first Republican in Colorado history who voted on the floor of the state Senate to pass that bill.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Excellent. Well, let's give all of our candidates an incredible round of applause.